It was exactly 9 in the morning on November 8, 1942. The sun was already starting to bake the dusty roads near the town of Ancor, North Africa. For the men of Lieutenant Edwin K. Smith's anti-tank platoon, the war was about to become very real, very fast. Peering through the narrow slits of their gun shields, the crew of the 37mm M3 anti-tank cannon watched as a column of Vichy French armored cars kicked up clouds of sand in the distance. This was Operation Torch, the massive Allied invasion of North Africa, and Smith's orders were chillingly simple: do not fire unless fired upon. The silence of the desert was broken by the sudden staccato chatter of machine gun fire from the lead French car. The Americans didn't hesitate. 2 of the tiny 37mm guns began banging away, their muzzles flashing orange in the morning light. The first armored car was hit, turning into a bonfire of oil and steel. Then, a skillful shot from another M3 gun, positioned over 1,800 yards away, struck the rear vehicle, trapping the column in a deadly bottleneck. The French crews abandoned their burning machines and scrambled for cover in a nearby drainage ditch. They surrendered shortly after. This was the baptism of fire for the M3 cannon in the Mediterranean. It was a victory, yes, but it was also a warning. The M3 was a weapon that was already becoming a ghost of a bygone era, fighting a war that was rapidly outgrowing it. Welcome to the War Archives. Today, we document the life, the failure, and the surprising survival of the M337mm anti-tank gun, the weapon that was obsolete the day the war began, yet served until the very last shot was fired. To understand why the United States entered World War II with such a small cannon, we have to look back at the late 1930s. At the time, the American military was trapped in a peacetime mindset. Their primary tank-killing weapon was the .50 caliber machine gun. To the generals of that era, it seemed enough. After all, the tanks of the 1920s and early 30s were little more than armored boxes with thin skins. But across the Atlantic, the Spanish Civil War was proving them wrong. As Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union used Spain as a testing ground for their new war machines, tank armor began to evolve. The era of the light tank was ending, and the age of the medium tank was beginning. The Germans had already adopted the PAK-36, a 37mm cannon that made the American machine guns look like toys. In early 1937, the United States Army finally woke up. They acquired a German PAK-36 for testing. In May of that year, representatives from the artillery, infantry, and cavalry branches met at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. They were divided. The infantry wanted a light, mobile weapon that a single soldier could maneuver. The artillery branch wanted a heavier, crew-served powerhouse. Testing continued through 1938. They experimented with different carriages and bore lengths, finally settling on a design on December 15, 1938. It was officially designated as the M3 37mm cannon mounted on the M4 carriage. However, in the starved fiscal environment of the pre-war United States, production moved at a snail's pace. Only 340 guns were built in 1940. 2,252 followed in 1941. It wasn't until the smoke cleared from Pearl Harbor that the arsenal of democracy finally shifted into high gear. By the end of 1943, factories had churned out a staggering 18,702 of these little cannons. What exactly was the M3? Technically, it was a 53.5 caliber weapon. This meant the barrel length was 53.5 times its diameter. It was a diminutive machine, only 154.5 inches long, and weighing just 912 pounds. This lightweight was its greatest asset. A crew of 4 men could manhandle the gun over short distances across mud, sand, or through thick jungle. If they needed to move faster, they used towing straps, pulling the carriage like a pack of workhorses. But a gun is only as good as what it fires. The M3 was a fast talker, capable of spitting out 25 rounds per minute. It had a variety of teeth. The standard armor-piercing shell could punch through 36 millimeters of steel at 500 yards. An improved ballistic capped round increased that to 61 millimeters. But the most terrifying round in the M3's arsenal wasn't for tanks, it was the canister round. Imagine a massive shotgun shell packed with 122 steel balls, each 3/8 of an inch wide. When fired, it created a wall of flying lead that could shred foliage and human targets up to 250 yards away. This round would eventually make the M3 a legend in the Pacific, but in the deserts of Africa, it was a different story. While the generals in Washington were still debating the M3's future, the gun was already screaming in the Philippines. In early 1942, as the Japanese surged across the Pacific, the M3 was the only thing standing between the American infantry and Japanese armor. When the Marines landed on Guadalcanal in August 1942, they brought their M3s into the green hell of the jungle. On August 21st, at the Battle of the Tanaru River, the Japanese Colonel Kiyono Ichiki launched a suicidal infantry charge. The Marines waited until the Japanese were in the open. Then the M3s barked. But they weren't firing armor-piercing shells. They were firing canister rounds. The blast of steel balls cut through the jungle foliage and human flesh like a scythe. The slaughter was absolute. Nearly 800 Japanese soldiers lay dead by morning, and Colonel Ichiki committed suicide. 2 months later, the Sendai Division attacked again, this time with 9 tanks. The thin armor of the Japanese tanks was no match for the M3. The American guns barked, and one by one the Japanese tanks were turned into burning wrecks on the sandbar. Only one vehicle made it across, and it was quickly finished off with a grenade. In the Pacific, the M3 was a king, but the Pacific was a world of light tanks and wood and mud bunkers. As the M3 enjoyed success in the jungle, it was about to face its greatest nightmare in the desert. Operation Torch brought the M3 into direct contact with the German Wehrmacht. This was a different breed of war. The Germans didn't use thin-skinned light tanks. They used the improved Mark III and Mark IV Panzers. Gun crews watched in absolute horror as their well-aimed shells struck the front of the German tanks and simply bounced off, spinning into the sand like pebbles. To kill a German tank, the M3 crew had to wait until the Panzer was dangerously close, or they had to maneuver for a flank shot, a nearly impossible task for a towed gun sitting in an open desert. The reports going back to the Army ground forces in the United States were grim. Frontline soldiers were begging for a replacement, but the bureaucrats in the rear were stubborn. They blamed the troops, claiming they were firing from excessive ranges or not sighting the guns properly. They didn't understand the reality of the front. A towed gun cannot choose its engagement. If a Panzer's charging at you, you fire, and if your shells bounce, you die. The prime movers for the M3, the unarmored jeeps and Dodge trucks, were sitting ducks. By mid-1943, the Army finally authorized the 57mm gun to replace the M3, but for many, it was already too late. Despite its failures against heavy armor, the M3 still had moments of legendary bravery. During the invasion of Sicily in July 1943, the famous Rangers under Colonel William Darby were attacked by Italian tanks at the town of Gela. The Rangers were lightly equipped and were being pushed back by captured French Renault tanks. Colonel Darby, in an act of pure desperation, drove to the beachhead himself, found an M337mm gun, and towed it back to the town. He used an axe to chop open the ammunition boxes and personally manned the gun, knocking out an Italian tank and stalling the assault. His bravery earned him the Distinguished Service Cross. But for every hero like Darby, there was a tragedy. Not long after, a battalion of the 16th Infantry was attacked by the heavy Tiger tanks of the German Panzer Division. The 37mm guns might as well have been pea shooters. The shells shattered against the Tiger's massive armor without leaving a scratch. The battalion commander was killed while personally manning one of the useless guns. By the end of 1943, the M3 was finished as a dedicated anti-tank weapon in Europe. It was relegated to the secondary role, mounted on M5 Stuart light tanks and M8 armored cars. There is one legendary report of an M8 armored car knocking out a German Panther tank with its 37mm gun, but historians believe this was a 1-in-a-million shot, a lucky ricochet that bounced off the ground and hit the thin belly armor. It wasn't something you could bet your life on. While the M3 was being retired in the West, it remained the queen of the jungle in the Pacific until the very end of the war in 1945. The conditions were perfect for the little gun. There were no Tiger tanks here. The Japanese armor remained thin and vulnerable. But, more importantly, the M3 became a master of bunker busting. Japanese defensive positions were often built from heavy logs and packed soil. The M3 crews would start by firing canister rounds to shave away the jungle foliage, exposing the bunker. Then they would fire armor-piercing rounds to crack the heavy logs. Finally, high-explosive shells would finish the job, blowing the position apart from the inside. The M3's lightweight allowed Marine and Army crews to drag the guns through swampy, trackless terrain where no other artillery could go. It was a fire support weapon that the infantry loved. It was their pocket artillery. During the war, the United States became the arsenal of democracy, exporting millions of weapons to its allies. But the M3 played only a tiny role in this global trade. Great Britain had its own 2-pounder, and the Soviet Union had its 45mm cannon. Neither needed the American 37. The vast majority of exported M3s went to the Chinese army. For the Chinese, who were fighting a Japanese military that relied heavily on infantry and light vehicles, the M3 was a godsend. After 1945, the M3 quickly faded into history. It saw some limited use in Third World armies during the early Cold War, but eventually it was relegated to museums and private collections. The legacy of the M3 37mm gun is a complicated one. It was a weapon that was obsolete before it entered its first battle. It failed its crews in the deserts of Africa and the fields of Europe, leading to unnecessary loss of life. And yet, in the hands of heroes like Colonel Darby or the Marines at Guadalcanal, it proved that even a small gun can change the course of history if the men behind it have enough courage. As we close this chapter of the War Archives, we are reminded that technology is only one half of the story of war. The other half is the grit and determination of the soldiers who are given imperfect tools and told to hold the line. The M3 was an imperfect tool, born of a nation that wasn't ready for war, but had earned its place in the dirt and the blood of the Second World War. If you found this deep dive into the archives of the M3 cannon insightful, please support the channel by hitting the like button. Share this video with fellow history buffs who appreciate the stories of the overlooked weapons of history. What do you think? Should the US have abandoned the 37mm sooner, or was its mobility worth the lack of power? Let us know in the comments below. To continue exploring the deepest secrets of human conflict, subscribe to the War Archives and turn on the notification bell. Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep exploring the past.